Hey, what's up? This is Chris Plush from cgmasters.net, and in the first part of this two-part series on creating a soft pretzel, we're going to be modeling everything in the scene. I'll take you through the modeling step by step, and you'll learn about using both curves and meshes, as well as using modifiers such as subsurf. We're also going to be using particle systems to place salt all over the pretzel, plate, and the table. Now, if you're brand new to Blender, then I recommend checking out our free primer series on our website. You can find the link to that in the description. Now, the first thing you need to do for this tutorial is download the pretzel reference image from the link in the description. We'll be putting this in Blender's background to use as basically blueprints for creating the pretzel. So once you've got that saved to your computer, then we can get started. All right, here we go. Now, the first thing I want to do is go into top orthographic view. Right now, we're in a rotated perspective view. So let me press numpad 5 to switch it to orthographic, which as you can see gives us more of a flat view of the scene. And I'll press numpad 7 for top view. And let's also press the T key to get rid of the left side toolbar. And now I think I want to delete everything in the scene and just start blank. So I'll press A once or twice until everything is highlighted, then press X and delete everything. Then I'll press the N key for the right side toolbar. We're going to load in that pretzel image in the background now. So let me go over here toward the bottom. There's a panel called background images. So I'll just expand that, click on add image, and then click on open. And now navigate to wherever you saved your pretzel image. And let's load in pretzel reference. And there we go. Now right now you can see the axis here is showing it in all views. If you click on that, you have other options. Let's just put this in top view. So I'll select top. That way it's only going to show up in top view. And now we can press the N key again to get rid of that toolbar and get some more room to work with. So what I'm going to do now is add a curve object, and we're going to use those curves to trace the shape of the pretzel. But right now my 3D cursor seems to be AWOL. It's all the way up there for some reason. And wherever the 3D cursor is where a new object is added in. So I want to place that right back in the center of the world. So to do that, I'll press Shift and S and choose cursor to center. So now our cursor is right in the middle of the pretzel, and we can add that curve in. So now I'll press Shift and A for the add menu, and from the curve submenu, I'll add in a circle. Now let me tab into edit mode, and from edit mode we can edit each individual point of this and actually shape the pretzel. And all of them are already selected, so what I'll do now is press S and scale that up to be the right height of the pretzel like that. And right now we have an enclosed circle, so we can't exactly create this shape here because it's open on both ends. So what I'm going to do is delete the segments on the right side, and then we're just going to shape the left side, and then we'll flip that over to the other side and have our full pretzel. So let me right click in the middle of that point up there. I'll hold Shift, right click in the middle of that one and that one. And now I'll press X and I'll erase the segments between them. So that gives us just half of that circle left here, and obviously we have some editing to do to get the correct shape of the pretzel. So let me right click on that middle point to select it, then I'll move it by pressing G, and then press Y to move it just on the Y axis, and we'll move it down to the middle of the pretzel right there. And we'll do the same thing down here. I'll right click in the middle of that, then I'll press G, and then Y and move it up to the middle of the thickness right there. So now let me show you how to actually edit the curve to get the right shape for the pretzel. So the middle points we've been clicking on are called control points. You can select them and press G and move around the whole thing. Then the points on the end are called handles. You can right click on one of them, so let's right click on that one, and then press G, and it'll reshape the curve around it like that. So that's how we're going to get the correct shape for the pretzel. So I'll drop this one right about there. Our goal right now is to get the whole curve in the middle of the pretzel all the way around the left side. So let me right click on that control point. I'll press G and I'll move it up here, right in the middle of the thickness there. Then select this handle right there, press G and move it down and around until that curve is nice and centered all the way up. And now let me select this handle here, press G and move it up to shape the top of the pretzel there. How's that look? I think that's looking pretty good. Let me just move that one around a little bit. And yeah, move the control point down and to the left a little bit. Just trying to get that centered in the middle of the pretzel as good as possible, although it's not really that necessary because pretzel is not exactly a perfect shape. Alright, so we're definitely off to a good start now. So now what we need to do is take this control point and extend it down to the tip of the pretzel over here. So let me right click on that control point and we'll use a tool called extrude. So let's select that and then press E to extrude it, which basically just extends it down to a new point. And we'll drop that right in the middle of the pretzel there. And let me right click on that handle right there. I'll press G, and I'll swing it around over there, and then left click to drop it there. And then let's right click on that control point, and we'll extrude it down all the way to the tip. So let me press E, and I'll extrude it all the way down to right there. And now let's do a little bit of reshaping. So I'll right click on that handle, press G, and move it down like that. And let's get a better idea of what the curve looks like so far. So let me press tab to get out of edit mode. And this gives us a better idea of what the curve looks like without all those extra lines. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe we could just soften it up a little bit in there. So let me select that control point. I'll press G, move it down a little bit. Select that handle, press G, move it up a little bit. And that softens it up a little bit more. All right, so we got half the pretzel made already. Now I want to flip this to the other side. So let me press tab to go back into edit mode. I'll press A once or twice until all the control points are selected. And what I'm going to do is duplicate this and flip it to the other side based on the 3D cursor's position. So if you accidentally clicked away and the 3D cursor is misplaced, then just simply press Shift and S and choose cursor to center to place that back in the center. Now to make sure that this mirrors around the 3D cursor and not the middle of the selection, which is default, let's go down into the header of the 3D view and go into the pivot point menu. The pivot point is basically the point around which an object or a selection rotates or scales, and it's typically, like I said, in the middle of the selection. But let's change the pivot point to 3D cursor in this case, so we can mirror it right around the cursor in the center. So now what we'll do is press Shift and D to duplicate these points, and right click to keep them in their original position. Then press Ctrl and M for the mirror hotkey. And you can see in the bottom left of the 3D view, we now have to select a mirror axis. So let's press the X key to select X as the axis to mirror on, and then press Enter to confirm that. And there we go, we have a full pretzel now. So now what we'll do is just edit the right side so it matches the blueprints more and things are less symmetrical. But the first thing we need to do is deal with the situation down here. When we mirrored it, these two control points didn't merge together. So if I select one of them and move it away, you can see there's going to be a gap between them. So what we'll do to merge them is just right click on either one of those control points, then press X and erase the vertex. It leaves us with a gap between these two control points. So what we'll do is just fill that in with a segment. So I'll right click on that control point, hold Shift and right click on that one, and then simply press F to create a segment between them. And now we can get to work shaping the right side. Now we'll do the same thing we did with the left side. We'll just select control points, move them around to the middle of the pretzel thickness, and then play with the handles until we get the correct shape. So let me right click on that control point, press G, move it over and up a little bit to the center like that. And that fixes the curve at the top as well. And let me right click on that control point, press G, move it to the left. Then I'll select this one, press G and move it up. And how's that curve looking? Let me select that handle, press G and move it in like that. I'll select that handle and move it out like that. And let me take this one, press G and move it up to the center there. And this kind of curls upward and then down. So I'll select that handle, press G and move it up. Same thing with this one. And then let me tab out of edit mode and see how things look. Looks pretty good up and around and over like that. That looks good. We already know the left side looks good. All right, so there is my final pretzel curve shape. All right, let's turn this into an actual 3D pretzel now. So right now I'm in object mode. If you're in edit mode still, then press tab to get out so we can more easily see our curves. And let's go over to the options over here. Let's click on this icon for object data. This gives us a bunch of different options we can change to edit our curve. In particular, we're going to be using the option called bevel depth right here. If I left click on that field and drag it to the right, you can see it's actually giving our curve some 3D to it. So let me rotate the view. You can see right now it's only filling in half. So we want the other side as well for a full round pretzel. So let's go up to the fill option up here. Right now it's set to half. Let's change that to full, and there we go. And right now it's a square, so we need to increase the resolution so we get a nice circle around this. So let's go over to the bevel resolution right here. I'll click on the right arrow until we get, let's go with a resolution of 5. That should be good for now. And all right, it's shaping up into something actually 3D now. So let me press numpad 7 for top view, and let's add a little bit more thickness to this, and then we'll shape it a little bit better to match the reference. And now one thing I should mention, if you go into top view and you no longer see the blueprints in the background, you might be in perspective view, and you can double check in the top left here. Mine says top orthographic, and orthographic view is the only type of view that blueprints will show up on. If I press numpad 5 to toggle between perspective and orthographic, you can see that top perspective view isn't showing me my blueprints. So I'll press numpad 5 to go back to orthographic, and there they are. All right, let's get back on track by adding more thickness to this to better match the reference. So I'll go back over to the bevel depth option, left click on that and drag it to the right until we have the right thickness. So it looks like something around 0.7 actually looks perfect, so I'll leave it there. Now back over in the 3D view, if we tab in edit mode, now we can edit the right side or left side and just make things match up with the blueprints better if we want to. But I actually think everything looks good as is on my end. So I'm going to move on to interweaving the intersections we have going on here. So to actually interweave this, we're going to move some of the control points up or down on the z-axis, depending on how the actual pretzel is interweaved. So let's actually double check that. Let me press the N key for the right side toolbar. I'll scroll down to the background images here, and let me click on that border there and drag to the left so we can see more of this. And let's change the option from back to front, and that will draw the reference image on top of anything we have in the scene. So now you can see the right arm here goes underneath at this intersection there, and then it goes above these two intersections here. Alright, so I'll remember that, and we're pretty much done with the reference image now. So what I'm going to do is click on that checkbox there to disable it. And then over the 3D view, I'll press the N key to get rid of the right side toolbar, and now we can get started. Now back over in the 3D view, let me press Shift and Space to go into full screen and just give us a little more room to work with. And let me point out something real quick. Make a note that I've placed these control points in the general areas of the intersections because I knew we would be moving them up or down. So having points in those areas just gives us more control. Now let me rotate the view like this and zoom in a little bit. We're going to work on the right side arm here first, and we know that sits above both of the intersections. So let me right click on that control point there, hold Shift and right click on that one. Then I'll press G to move it, and then press Z to lock movement to the Z-axis. And I'll move it up to about right there. I'm leaving it intersecting a little bit because later on we're going to edit the area down here to kind of dip down underneath it and more accommodate that sitting on top of it. So we're going to leave these intersecting a little bit. Maybe that's a little bit too much though. Let me press G and then Z again, move it up just a little bit more. That looks good. Alright, so that arm's finished, and now we'll do the same thing with the left side arm here. So let me right click on the control point there. I'll zoom in and rotate the view like this. Now I'll press G to move it, then press Z to lock it to the Z axis, and I'll move it up to about right there. However, it's dipping down too soon here, so we have this massive intersection. So we need to round this off more. So let me right click on that handle on the right side, then I'll press G and move it up and to the right like that to round that off more, and then it'll just dip down more drastically over here. Alright, that looks good, and the amount of intersection looks pretty good. Alright, so far so good. Now let me pan the scene down, I'll rotate it and zoom in to that final intersection we need to fix. So we know this arm right here goes above the other one at that intersection. So I'll right click on that control point, then I'll simply press G to move it, then press Z to lock it to the Z axis, and I'll move it up to about right there. Now let me rotate the view, make sure it looks good all around, and it does. There's maybe a little bit too much intersecting going on in the middle. I want to create a little bit of a gap there. So let me press numpad 7 for top view. And what we'll do is just move this control point to the right, then we'll move this one to the left. So with this control point selected, I'll press G and then move it to the right like that, and left click and drop it there. Then right click on this control point, press G and move it to the left until you can see a hint of a gap in between them like that down there. Now when you rotate the view, you can see there's a little bit of space between them and no intersecting, so we're good to go. Alright, let's edit these ends a little bit more as well. So let me rotate the view like this. I want this one to be dipping down a little bit. So I'll right click on that handle there, then I'll press G and I'll move it like that. And I want it to overhang a little bit more, so I'll right click on that control point, press G and move it to the right a little bit. Perfect. So now it also dips down right there where it's kind of bridging the two areas, which is more realistic because, you know, gravity and everything. And now let's go over to this one, and how's this looking? I want this to overhang maybe a little bit more, but everything else about it is perfect. So I'll right click on that control point and angle the view like this so it's flat right there at the end. Then I'll just simply press G and move it to the left a little bit. Now it moved the roundness at the top over to the left as well. So I'll right click on that handle, press G, and move it up and to the right to correct that. Alright, everything's looking pretty good. Alright, now we're done with curve editing, but what I want to do now is, if I press the Z key for wireframe, I want to be able to edit all of this geometry that we see, all of these lines. But we can't do that when we're using curves. We can only edit it by the control points. So what we're going to do is convert this to a mesh, and that way all of this geometry, all of this detail becomes real, and we can edit it however we see fit. So now let me press Tab to get out of edit mode, and to convert this we'll press Alt and C for the convert menu, and we'll convert this to a mesh from curve. So left click on that, and now if we press Tab to go back in edit mode, you can see instead of control points and handles, we now have all these vertices that we can select and move around to reshape things. So now we're going to do some mesh editing in order to cap the ends first. So let me zoom into this one, and I want to select all of the vertices connected to this loop here, this circle. So in order to loop select this, I'll hold the Alt key and I'll right click on one of the edges between the vertices. And that's going to select all the edges connected to it in the same direction. So with all of those vertices selected now, let me rotate the view like this so that it's nice and flat on the end there. We're going to extrude this to the right and then scale it down a few times until we have a nice rounded end. Now we'll extrude this the same way we did with the curves. You just simply press the E key and it extrudes it to new points and connects it to the old ones. So we'll bring this down to about right there and then left click to drop it there. And let's start scaling it down to round off the end. So I'll press S. And right now you can see it's scaling toward our 3D cursor all the way on the left there still. So let me right click to cancel that. And let's reset the pivot point so it scales toward the middle of the selection. So let me go back down to the pivot point menu here and switch it back to the default median point. Now we can press S and scale that down a little bit to about right there. And I'll left click. And we'll extrude it 2 more times and keep scaling it down. So let me press E to extrude it. And I won't extrude it as far this time because remember we want to round this off and end it. So I'll left click there and then press S and scale that down to really start rounding this off. And I'll left click right there. Let me zoom in and let's do that one more time. So I'll press E, extrude it out even less than before and left click there and press S and scale that down like that. So that creates a nice rounded progression to the tip for us. And now let me rotate the view. So now we still have a hole on the end that we need to face up. Now in order to create faces, you have to select anywhere from 3 or more vertices and then press the F key to create a face between them. Now it's typically best to face up 4 vertices to form something called a quad. So that's what we're going to do here. So let me right click on that vertex, hold shift, and I'll right click on those 3 as well. So it selects 4 adjacent vertices. Now we can press the F key to create a quad face between them. Now what you can also do in situations like this is select just 2 vertices. Then if you press the F key, it tries to find the next 2 vertices in the sequence and create a nice clean quad for you, if it can. Sometimes it can't do that, but in this case, it's very obvious that the next 2 vertices are going to form a quad, so we can continue pressing F all the way down the line. Alright, so that faced that up, and now let me zoom out, and let's go over here to this one, and we'll face this up the same way. Now in order to select all the vertices of that circle, we'll use loop select just like on the other side. So let me hold Alt, and I'll right click on the edge right there between the vertices, and it will select every edge connected to it. Now let me rotate the view like this until it's nice and flat on the end there. I'll zoom in a little bit. And what we're going to do is extrude this 3 times to the left and scale it down each time, just like we did with the other side. So now I'll press E to extrude it, and I'll bring it down into the left a little bit like that, and then left click to drop it there. And let's start scaling it in, so I'll press S, and I'll scale it down to about right there, and left click. Now let's extrude it 2 more times, so let's press E, extrude it to the left and down, but not quite as much as before. So I'll drop it right there. Then press S and scale that down to really start rounding this off. And press E 1 more time, extrude it to the left and down just a little bit. And then press S and we'll scale that down like that. Now we need to face up that circle there. So let me zoom into it. And I'll select the top 2 vertices and just press F all the way down the line. And we're good to go. Cool, so let's tab out and take a look at our pretzel so far. Not bad. Now let me press numpad 1 for front view, and what I'm going to do is move the pretzel up on the z-axis in order to sit on the red line here. Until we make a table, we're just going to pretend like the red line's our table. So let me zoom in over here, and I'll press G to move it, and then press Z to lock it to the z-axis. And I'll move it up right on top of the red line just like that. And now what we need to do is kind of squash everything on the z-axis so that it's less round and more of an oval shape. So let me tab into edit mode. I'll press A once or twice to select everything, and our cursor should still be at the bottom of the pretzel. If it's not, press Shift and S and choose Cursor to Center. That'll center the cursor in the world, which just happens to be centered over that red line, which is also our table. So now we can scale everything down toward that cursor and kind of squash the roundness of the pretzel a little bit. So let me go down to the pivot point menu, and I'll change pivot point back to 3D cursor. Then I'll press S to scale it, and then Z to scale it on the Z-axis. I'll scale it down to about 0.85, and I'm looking at the value at the bottom left of the 3D view. And then I'll left click there. And you can see we have more of an oval shape now instead of round, and that just looks a little bit more realistic. Alright, that's actually looking a lot better. Alright, now what we're going to do is fix the areas of the intersections like right here. And don't follow along right now, I'm just going to real quick show you what we're going to do, and then I'll take you through step by step. So what we'll do is take these 2 edge loops right there, and we're still using the 3D cursor as the pivot point. So I'm going to press S and then Z to scale that down like that and create a little bit of a dip there. However, the vertices surrounding it aren't affected by that scaling, so we have kind of an abrupt angle change there. So what I'm going to do is use something called proportional vertex editing. So let me undo that, and I'll turn on connected proportional editing. That's going to allow us to have a fall off. So if I scale these down, the vertices in the surrounding area that are connected to it are going to be affected as well based on a fall off. So now if I press S and then Z, you can see there's a circle there, which is our fall off size. Any vertices within that range are affected by it as well, but to a lesser degree as it gets toward the outside. So this is going to allow us to have more of a rounded edge there instead of an abrupt angle change. All right, so let me reset everything and I'll take you through step by step now. So angle your view like this and then hold Alt and right click on that edge between the points so it selects that entire loop of vertices. Then hold Alt and Shift and right click on that edge and it'll select that loop of vertices as well. And now we already have the 3D cursor as the pivot point, but let's go down into the proportional editing menu now and choose connected. Make sure you don't just choose enable, because then it's going to affect the vertices on this piece too. We want the vertices that are just in the surrounding area that are connected to the ones we have selected. So let's enable connected proportional editing, and now we can start scaling this. So now let me press S to start scaling it toward the 3D cursor, then press Z to lock it to the Z axis. Then I'll bring it right below the dough like that, and let's adjust the fall off now by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. So I'll adjust it to right there so we have a nice rounded top there as it goes to dip down, and then I'll left click. Let's rotate around, make sure that looks good everywhere. And yep, that looks perfect. Awesome. So now we'll do the same thing to the other side here. And just as a quick note, if you accidentally left clicked away and the cursor is misplaced, simply press Shift and S and choose cursor to center to reset that. All right, now on this side, it looks like there's just one edge loop immediately in the middle of this area. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge there and I'll select all the connected edges. And we'll just scale this one down on the Z axis and go from there. So let me get an angle over here like this so I can see right under the dough right there. And I'll press S to start scaling toward the cursor, then press Z to lock it to the Z axis. And I'll use the scroll wheel on the mouse to increase the fall off a little bit, and I'll left click right there. So it's starting to dip down underneath. So it's good on that side. However, we could use more of a dip over here. So I guess I'll take this edge loop as well and scale that on the Z axis too. So let me hold Alt, right click on that edge right there to select that whole edge loop. Then I'll press S and then Z and scale that down a little bit as well. All right, we got a good dip on this side, we got a good dip on that side, and we are good to go with them. So let's do the same thing for the intersection back here. Now let me tab back into edit mode and let's see which edge loop we want to scale down. Let me go underneath. It looks like this edge loop right here is right in the middle of it. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge to select that whole loop. And let me rotate the view like this and let's get a view of it over here. So now press S to scale it and then press Z to lock it on the Z axis. I'll scale it down like that and let me scroll down on the mouse wheel until it increases the fall off a little bit. I'll scale it down to about right there and then left click. So that looks good underneath. We might need to scale it down a little bit more on the outside. And in there is looking pretty good, but that could scale down a little bit more as well. So let me hold Alt and right click on that edge there to select that loop. And let's scale this down a little bit as well. So I'll press S and then Z, scale it down just a touch to help it out over there on the inside. That looks good. Let's do the same on the outside here. Let me hold Alt and I'll right click on this edge loop. Then I'll press S and then Z, scale that down a little bit, and let's decrease the fall off just to round off that top there. And then I'll left click there. All right, that looks good. And now we just got to deal with the center. All right, let me tab back into edit mode and then I'll swing around to the bottom like this. Let's see which of these edge loops is in the middle of this intersection. So it looks like these three right here. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge there to select that whole loop. Then hold Alt and Shift and right click on both of those edge loops as well. And now let me rotate the view, swing around to the top, and get a good view of this intersection right here. Actually, yeah, let's look at this one. And I'll press the S key to scale down toward the cursor, then press Z to lock it to the Z axis. Then scroll down on the mouse wheel until it increases the fall off like that. And I'll scale it down to about right there. So it's got a nice dip right there, and then it looks good on the other side as well. So I think we're good to go. Maybe I could scale it down a little bit more right here. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge there, then press S and then Z, scale it down just a little bit, and increase the fall off. And left click there. So that looks a lot smoother there. And cool, everything's kind of interlocking very nicely now. Now before calling this complete, I want to add some variation to the diameter throughout the pretzel, because right now it's completely consistent in how thick it is all the way around. So to add more realism, we're going to add that extra detail in. So let me tab back into edit mode, and let's reset the pivot point back to median. So let me go down to the pivot point menu and switch that back to median point. Now I'm going to make areas like right here a little bit skinnier so it gets more bulbous on the end. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge there to select that loop. Then I'll press S to scale it down. And let's use the scroll wheel to increase the fall off so it has more of a smooth transition. I'll scale it down to about right there and then left click. Now let's do the same thing over here. Let me hold Alt and right click on that edge there, then press S and scale that down to make it skinnier, and then left click. Now I'm going to make areas like the top two corners a little bit fatter as well as the bottom. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge there, then press S and scale it up a bit. And we'll do the same thing for the top corners. So that just additional size variation just adds to the realism by being an extra detail so things don't look completely consistent. All right, let's take one quick look around our object, make sure everything looks good before we move on. I think my pretzel might dip down a little bit too much there, so let me fix that real quick. Let me switch the pivot point back to 3D cursor. Then I'll tab back in and I'll hold Alt and right click on that edge there. Then I'll press S and then Z and scale it up. And I'll just scroll up on the mouse wheel to decrease the fall off, and I'll scale it up to right there. That creates a better connection right there. And all right, that looks perfect. Cool. So let me press numpad 7 for top view, and there's our finished pretzel. Now let's go back down to the header and into the pivot point menu, and we'll reset the pivot point back to median point. Now what I want to do is set up the view for the final render. So we're going to have to add a new camera in since we deleted our original one. So let me press Shift and A, and I'll add in a camera. Then I'll press the Z key for wireframe view, and you can see our camera in the middle of everything. So let me press numpad 3 for side view. I'll zoom out a bit. I'll press G, and I'll move it up and to the left like that. And then left click right about there. And now I'll press R to rotate it and point it at the pretzel as best as you can. And I'll left click right there. Now to go into camera view, we press numpad 0. And it looks like my pretzel is pretty much centered perfectly, but if you want to center it more, you can simply press the G key and then just move it wherever you need to. I'll left click right there, and then I'll press Z for shaded view so we can actually see the pretzel. Now I want more of an angled shot, so what I want to do is rotate around the middle of the pretzel, and right now the cursor is still in the middle of the world, so let's rotate around that. So we go back into the pivot point menu and switch that to 3D cursor. Now I can press R to rotate around the cursor, then press Z to rotate around the vertical Z axis. And I'll swing this over to right here to get a nice angled shot of the pretzel. All right, that looks pretty good. Now let me center this a little bit better, so I'll press G, I'll move it to the right and up a little bit like that. And if you want to zoom in or out, you can also press G and then middle click as you're moving, and it'll zoom in and out for you. So I'll zoom in to about right there, and left click, and then press G, and just center the view a little bit better, like that. All right, cool, perfect. And now let's add in a table for the pretzel. Now the table is just going to be a plane since we're not going to see the edges of it. So let's press numpad 7 for top view. And make sure the cursor is in the middle of the world. If it's not, press Shift and S and choose cursor to center. And let me zoom out a bit. And I'll press Shift and A, and I'll add in a mesh plane. Now let me tab into edit mode, and I'll press the Z key for wireframe so we can see it. And all the vertices should be selected. So now I'll just press S, and I'll scale that up like that. And let me press numpad 0 for camera view. Just make sure it encompasses the entire camera view like this. If it doesn't, just simply press S and scale it up a little bit larger. But it looks like I scaled it up perfectly. And right now you can see we still have the fall off in the middle, so we have proportional editing still enabled. Let's disable that now because I don't think we're going to be using it anymore. So let me go into the proportional editing menu and just click on disable. All right, let me tab out of edit mode. I'll press Z for shaded view, and here's what we got so far. Now let me press Shift and Space to get out of full screen, and I'll press numpad 7 for top view. Let me zoom into the pretzel, and I'll right click on it to select it. And right now, if I tab into edit mode, you can see all of our faces are rather large. This is kind of a low resolution pretzel. So what I want to do is add more geometry to this, which is going to help us better define where salt goes on the surface. And also later on in the next chapter of the series, it's going to help us actually color the pretzel in. So let me go over to the modifier buttons here and click on add modifier and add in a subdivision surface modifier. And you'll notice that things are a lot smoother now. You can see the low resolution cage we have, and then the subsurf modifier takes the shape of the cage and it basically just smooths it out on the inside of it. So we have a much smoother, more high resolution pretzel now. And in fact, if you press the Z key for wireframe and then tab out of edit mode, you can see how much extra geometry we have. And right now we can't actually use that extra geometry because it's only being generated by the subsurf modifier. It's not actually real. And that's actually a great thing about the modifiers. You can work from a lower resolution model and still have a high resolution final product. And that just makes things a whole lot easier to edit when you don't have that many vertices to work with. Now, it's typically not a good idea to apply your modifiers because then it actually takes all of this extra detail and it makes it real. So it modifies your original mesh, which is going to make things a little bit harder to edit if you need further editing. In this case, I want to apply one subdivision level just for the extra geometry to, like I said, add salt to the surface, and also it helps us with the coloring of the pretzel later on. So let's make sure that your pretzel is exactly the way you want it to look before you apply the modifier. And once it is, make sure that you're in object mode because you can't apply a modifier while you're in edit mode. And then let's go over to the modifier. Make sure you set the view subdivision level to 1 if it isn't already, and then click on apply. It will apply it at the view subdivision level. And now if we tab into edit mode, you can see we have all these extra vertices to work with. And now what we're going to do is select all the areas that we want to have salt. So let's make sure we're in shaded view by pressing Z once or twice. And let's make sure this option in the header is enabled. It's called limit selection to visible. When it's disabled, you have basically X-ray vision. So if we select anything on the surface, it'll also select all the way through. So make sure this option is enabled. So when we make a selection, it's only going to select vertices that are visible. So now let's press the C key for circle select, and you can use the scroll wheel on the mouse to make the circle bigger or smaller. I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller than the width of the pretzel. And what I'm going to do now is just left click and drag to select all the vertices in the areas I want there to be salt. So I'll start here, I'll just left click and just drag and sweep along the surface all the way around. So let me right click to get out of select mode. And the idea here is that salt will be randomly distributed within all of the regions that we have selected. So let me go over to the object data buttons, and under the vertex groups panel, click on the plus sign to add a new vertex group, and double click on the name, and we'll rename this to salt surface, and then click on assign. So all of our selected vertices are now in the salt surface vertex group, and we'll be able to use this information later on when we actually go to distribute the salt particles. Now if you rotate the view, you'll notice that because of the limit selection to visible option being turned on, it didn't select any vertices on the side or on the bottom, where salt would just fall off anyway. So it only selected vertices that were visible on the top. And you can go ahead and refine your selection if you want to. For example, I'd like these two vertices to be part of the group. So I'll just press C and left click and drag over any extra vertices that I'd want to be part of that salt group. And once you're done refining your selection, just go back over to salt surface and make sure you click on assign to add those new vertices to that group. All right, let me press numpad 7 to go back into top view. And once you're done refining your selection, we can move on. Now let's actually create a salt object that will randomly distribute over the entire salt surface. So let me press tab to get out of edit mode. And let's go down to the layers down here, and I'll click on the second block for the second layer. And now let's press Shift and A and add in a mesh cube. Let's press the N key now for the right side toolbar. And let's change the name of this by going to the item panel here and renaming this to salt cube. Then I'll press N to get rid of that. And let's go back to the first layer now. We're done with this for now. So I'll click on the first block there to go back to the layer with our pretzel. And let's add in a particle system that we'll use to distribute that salt cube object all over our salt surface. Now let's right click on our pretzel to select it. And let's go over to the particle settings by clicking on that icon there. Now click on new to create a new particle system. And under the settings field right here, let's rename this to salt. We're going to be reusing these settings for other particle systems as well, so I want to name that something that's going to be easily recognized. So right now it's set to emitter, and let's see what that looks like. Let me rotate the view, and I'll press the Z key for wireframe, and I'll press Alt and A to start playing an animation. You can see that when it's set to emitter, it's actually emitting these dynamic particles that are affected by things like gravity. So we don't want that. We want static particles. So in order to get static particles, we change the type from emitter to hair. And at the moment it gives us it gives us a hairy pretzel, which might be a cool look in the end, but what we're going to do is switch all of these hairs over to our salt cube. So we'll have salt randomly distributed on the surface instead of a gross hairy pretzel that fell on the floor. So let's go over here, and we're going to switch this from path, which is what these strands are, over to object. That way we can actually use a real object in place of those strands. So let me click on the duplicate object field below that, and we'll load in salt cube. So now you can see the cube that we made is all over the surface, but it's not being confined to any particular area. And we want to confine this to the salt surface vertex group. So let me go down to the vertex groups panel right here, and I'll expand that. And then under the density field, I'll click on that and choose salt surface. Now you can see our cubes are only being placed on the areas where we selected those vertices and added them to that vertex group. All right, so far so good. Now obviously we still have a little work to do. These are way too big, there's too many of them, and they're too uniform. So let's fix the scale first. Let's go over to the size field here underneath the duplicate object group, and we'll change the size down to 0.007. I'm going to increase random size up to 0.25 as well. That's just going to give us a little variation in the scale of these cubes. All right, that's looking good so far. All right, let's change the number of particles down now. Let's go over to the number field here, and we'll decrease that down to 600 particles. And that looks a lot better. And now let's deal with the uniformity by randomizing the rotation of the salt particles. So let's go over here, and we're going to need to enable an advanced set of options in order to get the rotation values we need. So let's click on advanced to enable that. Now we have this new rotation panel here. So let me expand that, and I'll click on the checkbox to enable it. And let's change the initial orientation to normal. What that's going to do is it's going to take the surface that the salt cube is on, and it's going to rotate the cube based on that surface. So now we can actually increase the random value here up to 1, and it will totally randomize the rotation of the cube. All right, so that is looking good. That's shaping up. Now it was actually important to switch the initial orientation to normal. If we left it at velocity and hair, the random value just doesn't work. So we need to give these cubes an initial orientation based on the angle of the surface, and then it can randomize the angle of the cubes. Now if you don't quite grasp that idea, it doesn't really matter. You just need to remember that that is how you randomize the rotation. So now what we're going to do is make these cubes look a little bit less cube-like and more salt-like. So let me click on the second layer down there, and I'll right-click on the cube to select it, and let's do some editing. Now I'll press Tab to go into edit mode, and we need some more vertices to work with, so we're going to subdivide this. But I'm also going to use a tool called subdivide fractal to give us a random look in the end. So it's going to make something that looks a little bit more jagged, a little bit more crystal-like. So let me press the T key for the left side toolbar. We're going to need this operator menu down here. So let me click on that border and drag it to the right. I'll click on this border and drag it up. So whenever we use a tool, we typically have some options that pop up in this operator panel. So I'll press W over here, and then click on Subdivide from the Specials menu. And it gives us these extra vertices to work with by basically taking each quad, putting a vertex in the middle in order to have 4 quads instead of 1. So we've got all these extra vertices to work with, and over here we have some subdivide options. Namely, we have this fractal option here. If I left click on that and increase it, you can see it randomizes the positions of all the vertices. So I'm going to increase that to something like 2.38, looks pretty good. And you can even use the random seed value down here to create a randomized look. So maybe I'll go with, that looks pretty good. I'll go with a random seed of 6. And it gives me more of a jagged look for our cube. And you can edit that a little bit more if you want, just by selecting some vertices and pressing G to move them around. But I'm just going to stick with that. It looks good enough to me. So let me press the T key to get rid of that toolbar. I'll press Tab to get out of edit mode. And then I'll click on the first layer to go back to our pretzel. Now before I go ahead and add mustard to this, what I'm going to do is make sure that this is as high resolution as we need it to be for the final render. Because for example, if I zoom in, you can see the silhouette of this is kind of faceted, which indicates that it's low resolution, and we could make this a little bit more detailed. So let me go over, well first let me right click on the pretzel to select it. Then let's go over to the modifier buttons and add in a subdivision surface modifier. That's going to smooth things out just like we did earlier on. And right now it's set to a view level of 1. Which is giving us this much detail, which is probably all we need for the final render as well. So make sure you set the render level down to 1 as well. All right, so everything's looking a lot more smooth now, and that should give us a better final render. Now there's one last little thing I want to do with that, and that's move the subsurf modifier to the top of the modifier stack so that it's calculated first. The reason that's important is because we want the particle system to be based on the final subsurf mesh so that the salt particles placement is more accurate. So let me click on the up arrow of the subsurf modifier and keep your eyes on the salt cubes. You'll notice they change position a little bit, and that's more accurate now. Because with the particle system at the top of the stack, it was just being calculated based on the low resolution mesh, so it wasn't quite as accurate. All right, now what I want to do is fix these little dimples on the end here. They've been bugging me. So let me tab into edit mode, and you can see this weird arrangement of vertices in the middle, and that's what's creating our dimples. So what we're going to do is delete those vertices and just reface the area. So let me press A to deselect everything, and then I'll press the C key for circle select. And then I'll left click and drag over all those vertices in the middle, and then right click to get out of it. Then I'll press X and erase those vertices. Now let's select that inner circle by holding Alt and right clicking on one of its edges until the whole loop is selected. Now let's rotate the view until it's nice and flat on the end like that, like we've done before. And I'll zoom in, and I want to scale this down to make it more rounded there. But before I do that, we need to reset the pivot point. So let me go into the pivot point menu and change it back to medium point. Now press S and scale that down quite a bit like that to round it off more. And I'll left click right there. And let's make one more extrusion and scale it down. So I'll press E, extrude it to the right just a little bit like that, and drop it there. Then press S and scale that down to about right there. Now we just have a small hole to fill in. So what I'll do is press F to create what's called an n-gon. And what an n-gon is any face that has more than 4 vertices. And you typically shouldn't use n-gons because it can create some weird shading. But in this case, it's a very small area, and it's a fairly flat area, so I don't think it's going to cause any trouble. But just to make sure, let's tab out of edit mode, and we'll rotate the view to make sure all the shading looks good in the area. And it does. All right, so that solved that problem, and the other problem, the other piece over here has the same issue. And you can go ahead and fix that if you want, but it's not going to be visible for my final render since we have a view over here of this. So I'm just going to ignore the other side for now and move on. All right, let's create some mustard. So let me press numpad 7 for top view. And let me get rid of the plane in the background. It's not only too bright, but it's also getting in my way when I rotate the scene. So let me right click on it to select it, and then press H to hide it. Now let me right click on the pretzel. Let's hide the particle system for right now because I want to draw a path for the mustard directly on the surface of the pretzel. So I don't want the salt getting in the way. So let me go over to the particle system modifier and just click on the eye to make it invisible in the viewport. Now we're going to use a mesh to draw the path for the mustard. It's just a little bit easier than using curves because this is going to be more of a detailed path and I don't want to have to deal with all of the handles and control points. So with the cursor still in the middle of the world, I'll press Shift and A and I'll add in a mesh plane. And let me press the Z key for wireframe view. And I'll tab into edit mode and we only need 2 of these vertices. So let me select, I'll right click on that to select it, hold Shift and right click on that, then press X and erase both of those vertices. Now let me press A to select all these vertices, and I'll move them into the middle of the gap right there, and then left click. Now I'll press the Z key for shaded view again. It's important that we be in this view because we're going to need to be able to see these surfaces in order to snap these vertices directly onto those surfaces. Now let's enable some snapping tools to help us with this. So let's go to the header down here, and first we'll enable the magnet icon there for automatic snapping. And then let's go into the snap element menu here, and change it over to face. That's going to make it so whenever we move a vertex, if there's a face behind it, it's going to snap directly to it. So let me right click on that vertex there. I'll press G and move it down and to the right like this where we want the mustard to start. And then I'll left click. Now if you rotate the view, you can see that that vertex is directly on top of that surface. So our snapping tools are indeed working. Let me press numpad 7 for top view again. And I'll right click on the other vertex now to select that. Then press G and move it onto the surface right here. And then left click. And now what we're going to do is basically extrude this vertex all the way around to form the path of our mustard. And you can get a little bit fancy with this if you want to too. You can create some swirls, you can create some zigzags. I'm going to create basically a straight path first, and then I'll go through and maybe add some extra vertices to edit it and make it look a little bit more interesting. So now let me press E, and I'll extrude it to right there. I'll just keep doing that all the way down the line. And when we come to intersections like this, here's what we're going to do. We're going to press E and extrude it right to the base of that intersection there. And then we're going to extrude it 3 times on top. Or actually, let's extrude it 4 times on top. So I'll press E, extrude it to the side right there. Then press E and extrude it 2 times on the top. And then 1 on this side. And then press E and extrude it to the base over there. So let me rotate the view and I'll show you why. If the vertices at the base are too far away, we have some basically floating mustard. So we didn't want that, so we have to have them pretty close to those intersections. Though I did leave a little bit of space because I think that's more realistic. The mustard will be hanging there a little tiny bit, so that looks good to me. Let me press numpad 7 to go back into top view, and let's continue our extrusions all the way around. So I'll just keep pressing E and extrude it right in the middle of the pretzel like this. And let's get one at the base right there. And again, we'll extrude it 4 times on top. So let's get one on the side, two up top, and one on this side, and then one at the base. And we'll just keep extruding around. Same thing over here, one at the base, 4 on the part that goes up, and then 1 on the other side. And another way to extrude it around, you don't have to keep pressing E. You can also hold Control and left click, and it will make an extrusion to that point. So I'll keep doing that from now on. All right, so we made it to the end. I'll place my last point there, and that's what we've got so far. Right now, the path of the mustard is too perfect. It's dead center of the pretzel, and there's no variation, so that's not going to be as fun or as realistic in the end. So what we're going to do now is just go through, add some extra vertices, and move some vertices around to create some variations. So let me start up here. I'll select these 2 vertices, press W and subdivide them. Now I can select that vertex, press G, and move it around like that to create more of a zigzag there. I'll select that, press G, and move it up. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to subdivide some vertices, or subdivide some edges, I mean, and then just move some vertices around to create a more interesting look. Alright, so this is my end result right here, and once you're finished editing yours, we can move on. Now let's reset the snapping tools before we do anything else. So I'm going to go down to the header, switch the snap element back to increment so we can snap things to Blender's grid again, and then click on the magnet icon to turn that off. So now we can enable snapping by holding Control instead of it being automatic. Alright, now let's add a subsurf modifier to smooth out these lines. So let me tab out of edit mode, I'll press the Z key for wireframe so we can actually see the lines. And let's go over to the modifiers and add in a subdivision surface. That's going to smooth out our zigzags and stuff like that. Just make it look more liquid-like, I guess. And let's increase the view level to 2, so it's nice and smooth all the way around. Alright, that's looking good so far. Now we're going to do something similar to what we did with the pretzel curve, where we added a bevel shape to it so it was actually 3D, but that only works with curve objects, not mesh objects, which is what this is. So what we're going to do is just convert this to a curve object, and then we'll go from there. So to convert this, the hotkey for that again is Alt and C, and we're going to convert it to a curve from a mesh this time. So left click on that. Now if we tab into edit mode, you can see that it's a little bit different, and we have those path lines, which indicates that this is indeed a curve. And now we can use all the curve options like bevel depth, which is going to make this 3D for us. Let me tab out of edit mode now, and let's go up to the object data buttons by clicking on that icon there, which is going to give us our curve options. Now instead of simply using the bevel depth option here, which is going to extrude a perfect circle along that path, we're going to use the option below that called bevel object. This enables us to create our own curve shape and have that extrude along the path instead of a perfect circle, which is better because I'd rather have more of an oval shape extruding along that path instead of a perfect circle. And this only works with curve objects, so let me press Shift and A, and from the curve submenu I'll add in a circle. And let me pan over here. I'm going to bring it over here away from everything else so we can edit it. I'll press G and then X, and then I'll left click over there to drop it. Now let me press Tab to go into edit mode, and I'll press S and then Y, and I'll scale that down to more of an oval shape like that, and then left click. And let me tab out of edit mode, and let's rename this actually. So I'll press the N key. Actually, probably not necessary, but we'll rename it anyway. So in the item panel right here, we'll rename this to mustard shape. Then I'll press N to get rid of that toolbar. Let me select our mustard path here now, and over in the bevel object field here, I'll left click on that and select our mustard shape. So you can see the mustard shape is actually extruding through, but it's really huge. So it takes into account how big it is out here. So let me right click on that to select it, tab into edit mode, and press S to scale it down until we get the right diameter of mustard like that, and left click. How's that looking? That looks a lot better. Alright, we're off to a good start with that now. Now let me select the mustard object, so I'll right click on that, and it's intersecting the pretzel a little bit too much. So let me zoom in, and I'll press G and then Z to move it up on the Z axis. Let's leave it intersecting a little bit so it's kind of like flat on the bottom, but I just wanted more of a rounded edge there like that. And that looks good. And now we're going to need to edit this pretty much the same way we did with the pretzel. We have the mustard intersecting right there, so we're going to have to bump one up and over the other. And also, when we're finished with that, we'll also make some areas thinner and some areas a little bit fatter, just like we did with the pretzel as well. Now the first thing I'll do is smooth out this faceted look. So let me press the T key for the left side toolbar, And with this object selected in object mode, we can then go up to the Tools option here and click on Smooth Shading. Let's press T to get rid of that. And let me tab into Edit mode. And what we're going to do now is use Connected Proportional Editing to bump up these ropes of mustard over one another. So let me go down to the Proportional Editing menu here and enable Connected. Now what we're going to do is just follow a logical path and see which ropes of mustard go over the other. So we started the mustard over here, which means this stays on the bottom. So both of these in this direction will bump up and over it. So let me right click on that vertex right there. I'll press G and then Z and move it straight up, and then use the scroll wheel on the mouse to just affect a little bit, just affect a few vertices around it like that. And I'll left click right there. That looks good to me. And we'll do the same thing down here. Let me right click on that vertex, press G and then Z and move it up. Just like that. And what we can do is fix some of the intersections like over here. So let me right click on that vertex, press G. I'll scroll on the mouse wheel to increase the fall off and bring it over like that. We'll do the same thing over here. And that's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to go around the whole mesh. I'm going to fix the intersections or areas that are intersecting too much, like right here. And I'm going to also make some of these ropes of mustard bump up and over the others. Now, once you're finished editing that, what we're going to do is convert this to a mesh object in order to cap the ends and also make some areas thinner. So let me tab out of edit mode. And if you press Z to go into wireframe, you can see it's pretty high resolution right now. So I want to lower the resolution in order to make this a little bit easier to edit when we convert it to a mesh. So right now, the resolution is a little bit too high because our curve object over here has a resolution that's too high. So let me right click on that to select it. And I'll go up to the preview U resolution right here. And I'll just click on the left arrow and decrease that down to, let's go with 4. So you can see the resolution is a lot lower now and a lot more manageable, so it's going to be easier to edit. All right, that looks good. So let me right click on that, make sure it's selected, and I'll press Alt and C and convert it to a mesh from a curve. Now if we press Tab to go into edit mode, you can see we have good old-fashioned mesh vertices to work with. So now we can start editing this the same way we did with the pretzel. We're going to cap the ends, and then we're just going to make some areas thinner just for some extra variation to make things look more realistic. So let me zoom in to this over here. We'll start off with this, and let me hold Alt and right click on that edge there to select that loop of vertices. And I still have proportional editing on, which is good because we want this to kind of taper off to a point instead of just have a rounded end. So I'll press S to scale that down like that. And you can see the kind of tapering effect it's having. So I'll scale it down to right there, then press left click to confirm that. And now let's turn off proportional editing and we're going to round off the end. So let me go down into the menu here and I'll disable proportional editing. And let me angle the view like this so that it's nice and flat on the end. Then I'll press S to scale that down to about right there. And then press G and move it over here. And now let's extrude that and scale it down again. So I'll press E to extrude it, and I'll left click to drop it there, then press S to scale it down. And I think that's looking pretty good. Let me press G and move it inward a little bit, just to round it off instead of having it more pointy. And I'll just press F and create an end-gon there. Let me tab out, make sure everything looks good. All right, that looks pretty cool. And let's go over to this side and we'll do the same exact thing. So let me turn on proportional editing. So let me press Tab to go back into edit mode. And I'll go into the proportional editing menu and enable connected. Now let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop. I'll press S and scale it down to taper it. And then left click there. Now let's go back into that menu and disable proportional editing. Then I'll press S to scale this down. Left click there and press G and move it to the left a little bit. Now let's press E and extrude it to the left just a touch. And then press S to scale it down. And then finally press F to create an end-gon there. All right, let me tab out and zoom out. And let me see how it looks so far. All right, that ain't bad. That ain't bad. And now let's add some variation to the thickness here and there. So let me tab back in. And let me go down into the proportional editing menu and enable connected again. Now I'll just hold Alt and right click on that edge there to select that circle. I'll press S to scale it down. And then I'll scroll on the mouse wheel to increase the fall off. And I'll scale it down to about right there just to make it thinner in that area and add some variation to it like that. I'll do the same thing over here. I'll hold Alt, right click on that edge, press S and scale it in a little bit like that. And I'll just do that in a couple of places just to create some variation. All right, that looks good to me. And I actually need to fix something real quick because I have the mustard going along here and then it's all of a sudden going over there. When that's not realistic, it should be flat right there since this is the start of our mustard path. So let me hold Alt and right click on that edge loop. I'll press G and then Z, move it down. And I'll use the scroll wheel for the fall off to get it right on the surface of the pretzel like that. Then I'll select that edge loop, press G and then Z and move it up and over it like that. All right, so that was a quick fix on that. All right, so edit your mustard until it looks exactly how you want it to look, and then we're done with it. And at the moment, it's looking pretty jagged, so let's add a subsurf modifier to really smooth this out. So let's go up and over to the wrench icon for the modifier buttons, and add in a subdivision surface modifier. And right now the viewport is set to level 1, and it's still looking slightly jagged, but we have a render level set to 2, which is going to be perfect in the end. And in fact, let's do that for the pretzel as well. Let me right click on the pretzel to select it, and I'll increase the render levels up to 2, just so it's really high resolution when we go to render it. And right now we can re-enable the particle system visibility and kind of see how everything looks all together. And that's looking pretty darn cool. All right, now let me press numpad 7 for top view, and we're going to add a plate for the pretzel to sit on. Actually, first let's get rid of the oval over here. We're actually finished with this, so I'll right click on it and then press X and delete it. Now make sure your cursor is centered. If it's not, press Shift and S and choose cursor to center. Now press Shift and A and add in a mesh circle. Then I'll press the Z key for wireframe view to see the circle, and I'll tab into edit mode, and with all the vertices selected, I'll press S and scale it up like that, so that it's just about the same size as the pretzel, and then I'll left click there. And then press G, and I'll move it up a little bit to kind of center it with the pretzel a little bit better like that. And let me rotate the view, and let me make sure that circle actually encompasses the whole pretzel. So it looks like I should scale it up just a little bit, so I'll press S and scale it up a little. All right, that looks good. And let me turn off proportional editing since we're done with that. So I'll go into this menu and click on disable. And let me press numpad 7 for top view again. And now we're going to extrude this and scale it up to form the part of the plate that actually rises up a little bit. So let's press E to extrude it and then immediately press S to scale it up. And we'll scale it up to be about that size right there. Looks pretty good. And then left click. And now let's rise this up. So let's press numpad 1 for front view. I'll press G and then Z to move it straight up. And move it up to about right there. Looks pretty good to me. Let me rotate the view, and I'll press the Z key for shaded view. And yeah, that looks good. So now let's get to work facing up the center of this. So now I'll hold Alt and right click on one of those edges on the inside to select the inside circle. And then for right now, I'll just simply press F to create an n-gon there. Now I want to work with this alone away from everything else. Right now we're in something called global view, which is showing us everything. But if we press / on the numpad, it takes us into local view. So it'll bring anything you have selected into its own isolated view so we can work with it alone away from everything else. Now let me tab out of edit mode and let's take a look at this. So what I want to do now is bevel the edge at the bottom here so it's nice and smooth. So let's go over to the modifiers, click add modifier, and add in a bevel. So right now it's beveling not only the bottom edges but every single edge in the mesh. So we want to constrain that to just the angle at the bottom. So let me click on angle as the limit method. Now the angle right here, anything above that angle will be beveled and anything below it will not be beveled. So let's left click on that and drag it down until it's just getting the bottom angle like that. So I set mine to 14 degrees. And right now it's only beveling with one segment. So let's increase that to get a higher resolution bevel. So I'll increase the segment number up to, let's go with 4. So that's a nice smooth bevel there now. Let me press Z for shaded view again. And I'll press the T key and choose smooth shading for this. All right, that's a good looking bevel at the bottom there. Let me get rid of this grid that's intersecting it. That is really annoying because it always kind of looks like edges that are part of the mesh. So let me press the N key for the right side toolbar. And where is it? Let's expand the display panel right here. And I'll disable grid, X, and Y. And that'll disable visibility of those things when you rotate the view. So we're not seeing that anymore. Now I'll press the N key to get rid of that. And let's look at what we got so far. All right, that's looking pretty good. So now let's add some thickness to this, and we're going to do that using another modifier called solidify. So let me angle the view like this to get a good idea of how thick the rim's going to be. And let's click add modifier and add in solidify. It added a little bit of thickness, but obviously we need to crank that up. So let's click on the thickness field and drag it to the right until we have the right thickness. So I'm going to go with something around 0.12, looks pretty good to me. But now we need to round it off. So let's add in a subdivision surface modifier to really make this high resolution and nicely rounded. So let's go back up and click on add modifier and add in a subdivision surface. And let me increase the view levels to 2, same as the render. And it's looking nice and smooth now. However, it really sharpened up the top here. And the way to fix that is let's tab into edit mode, and we need to add an extra set of edges around the rim right there. The more geometry you have near a rim, the more defined that rim is going to be when you're using a subsurf modifier. And that's a general rule of the subsurf modifier too. You'll be using that rule all the time. So in order to add an extra set of edges up there, we're going to use the loop cut tool. The hotkey for that is Control and R. So press that and hover over the middle of the plate like that. And you can see this purple line pops up. That's the preview of the new edge loop that's about to be added in. So let's left click to add that edge loop in. And now we can slide it up and down. So let's slide it up toward that rim. And you can see the closer we get to the top, the more defined that rim is. So let me drag it down to right about there. Looks good. And I'll left click. So with that extra set of edges up near the rim, we have a more defined rim and it's nicely rounded off still and everything looks perfect. So let me tab out and take a look at our finished plate. Not bad at all. Now let's go back to global view and check out our pretzel on top of the plate. So I'll press / on the numpad to switch from local view back to global view and check it out. Cool. Let me press numpad 0 to go into camera view and see how it looks from here. All right, we're doing pretty good. And now what I want to do is add some fallen salt on the plate and the tablecloth as well, which we still have hidden. So with the plate selected, I'll press tab to go into edit mode, and I want to select the middle face. So I'll hold Alt and right click on that edge there to select that edge loop. And what we're going to do is just separate this into its own object and then add a particle system to it. So I'll press Shift and D to duplicate it, and then right click to keep that duplicate in place. And then I'll press the P key and separate that selection. And that'll separate that into its own object. So in order to access that object, let's press tab to get out of edit mode of the plate. Then I'll press the Z key to go into wireframe so we can actually see what we're selecting. And I'll right click in that area until we select that new disk that we just separated. And right now it's being solidified. So I'll click on X to delete the solidify modifier. And we don't need the bevel modifier either. So I'll click on the X for that as well. But we'll keep subsurf so it keeps it nice and smooth around the edges. All right, so this is the area that the salt is going to be distributed on. And you know what? Let's delete the subsurf modifier as well. We don't need those extra faces. So let me click on the X button for that to delete it. And now let's go over to the particle buttons by clicking on that icon there. And let's click on new to create a new particle system. And we already have salt particle settings saved from the pretzel. So what we'll do is go into the settings menu right here and load in salt. And you can see we have some salt on the bottom of the plate now. But we have, I think, too many salt particles on the bottom of the plate. So I want to change those settings. But the problem is, you can see there's a number 2 next to the salt settings right there. And that's the number of objects that are using these settings, which means if we change the settings like the number of particles, it's also going to change it for the pretzel as well. So let's instead click on the plus sign right there next to the name, and that'll create a duplicate of those settings that we can use for just the plate. And now we can decrease the number down to maybe 300. Looks good. I think I'll go with 300. That looks pretty good. Maybe just a touch lower. How about 250? All right, cool. Now I don't actually want this extra disk to render. I just want the salt particles that emits to render. So what I'll do is go over to the options here and I'll scroll down to the render panel. There's an option called emitter and right now it's enabled. That means that both the salt particles and the object emitting the particles will render. So I'll just uncheck that and that way only the salt particles render but the actual emitter object will be invisible. Alright, so now the last thing we need to do is just scatter some salt on the tablecloth. And right now we have that hidden. So I'll press Alt and H to unhide it. And I'll right click on it to select it. And the first thing we'll do is make sure that it's underneath the plate. So I'll press numpad 1 for front view, and I'll zoom in, then I'll press G and then Z to move it down on the Z axis, right below the plate like that, and then left click. Alright, now let me press numpad 0 for camera view. It's important to go into camera view because I want to make sure I have a nice scattering of particles in the actual final render. And now let's go over to the particle systems. I'll scroll up to the top, and then click on new to create a new system. Now we'll use the same settings that we used for the pretzel, and then we'll just duplicate those settings to decrease the number of particles. So let me go over to the settings menu here and load in salt. And we'll click on the plus sign to create a group of settings all its own, and then we'll decrease the number down to something like 100. And let me press the Z key to go into wireframe and just see how scattered those particles look, and that actually looks good to me. So let me press Z to go back into shaded view, and there it is, ladies and gentlemen. We are finished our soft pretzel. So in the next video, we're going to be going over shading and rendering and just totally complete this. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, or you can email me at contact@cgmasters.net. So until the next video, I'll see you around.